But I'm really very pleased to speak to you, these members of the legal fraternity, at this critical moment in the life of our country. And when I was invited, I was given a carte blanche. Then through negotiations, we agreed that I will talk to you on the subject of corporate governance, corruption, and failing institutions in our country. I'm saying this time is critical because we are in the middle of a debate on how to reform a most critical institution in the making of a nation. This is the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. And I'm happy that my friend Isaac Hassan is in audience. We are in the middle of a very necessary debate on how to make our elections reflect the wishes of the people, so that when people have voted, you can say the Kenyan people have spoken. How to make every vote count, and how to ensure every vote is counted. In the process, we are also discussing the current and the future management of our country. It is my position that only the IEBC stands between the people of Kenya and their desire for an honest and caring government. Only 6 years ago, we unveiled what was easily seen as one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. I've said seen because I have my reservations. Today, however, we are taking a closer look at once again, we are saying we must jumpstart reforms in virtually all our key governance institutions: the judiciary, the police, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the schools, and by extension, the education system, the financial institutions, and even the legislature. All these institutions are suffering from the impediments created by a government that is resisting change and striving to return the country to the old order. The question of governance in our country naturally ropes in issues like corruption and the state of our institutions. August 2016 is therefore a good time to share thoughts on corporate governance, corruption, and the working of our institutions. Because governance is about institutions. Human beings have a tendency to go outside the established order. It is strong institutions which ensures good governance. I believe you will agree with me that sound governance is eluding us. Our institutions are failing us. Corruption and dishonesty have gained the upper hand. Everyone is paying a heavy price. Everyone is paying a heavy price. But let us take the journey down the memory lane. And let us go back to and find out where the rain began to beat us as a country. And the starting point is the struggle for independence of our country. During that struggle, the nationalist movement was very united in fighting against the colonial system. Colonial system was an alien system imposed on our people. And to the colonizer, Kenyans were just bloody Africans. They did not care whether you were a Kikuyu, a Maasai, a Kalenjin, a Mkamba, a Jaluo, and so on. You're just a bloody African. Yeah, in those days of our youth, you'd go to some hotels and you find signs there. Africans and dogs are not allowed here. So that is where you are. This impelled the African to rise against an alien system. And nationalism was at its height. People united to fight colonialism until independence came. After independence, the development in Kenya followed very much the development in even other African countries. The nationalist movement, which had united the people, split in the middle. And you had two forces. And my position here, I posit that from that time up to now, there have been two forces pulling in two diametrically opposed directions. There have been the forces for change versus the forces for status quo. There are those who saw independence as an opportunity to supplant the outgoing colonial master and become the new masters and rulers of their people, to lord it over their people. In other words, to occupy the privileged position which had been occupied by the colonial master. And then there were those who wanted to make independence more meaningful to the people, to open it up for more popular participation of the people in governance, both in governance and also in the economic activities of the country. So these two forces have been pulling in different directions. And this struggle is what has characterized our state from that time up to now. This struggle has sometimes been peaceful, sometimes it has even been violent. It's against that background that you can explain the assassination of Pio Gama Pinto in 1965. It's against that background that you can explain the emergence of KPU, the arrests and detentions of political leadership, the assassination of Tom Mboya, of J.M. Kariuki, and so on. So this struggle was not ethnic, it was ideological. It has never been ethnic. I say that ethnicity is the disease of the elite. The elite in competition for resources in the country are the ones who usually refer to ethnicity. Some say the differences in 66 and so on were ideological. That's why on one hand you had Jomo Kenyatta, the chief Lieutenant Jomo Kenyatta was Tom Mboya, a Luo. You had Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, his chief lieutenant was Bildad Kagia, a Kikuyu. So that was a theological struggle, it was never ethnic struggle. But the elite then went in at Munduwakwa. Somebody wanted to remove power from the house. But this struggle has moved on. That's how you see the arrest and detention of officials of KPU. People like Jean-Marie Sironi, Martin Shikuku, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, George Anyona, and so on and so forth. It went on through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s, and the 2000s. So you'll see, I state that I'm talking about a progressive constitution guardedly. Because some of you were old enough and were at Bomas of Kenya. And at Bomas of Kenya, again, you had this split between these two forces. The forces of status quo and the forces of democratization. In my view, the original Bomas draft constitution, the people's constitution. Thereafter, they went to Kilifi and bastardized it. And they baptized it by raping it. We rejected it. We rejected it. We were no's and yes. Oranges and bananas. Again, that is a repeat of this struggle. Thereafter, we came in the post-election violence, and then the compromise of 2010. The 2010 is not the People's Constitution. The People's Constitution is the Bomas Constitution. This is a compromise which was forced on the progressives by the reactionary forces. That's why we have what you have here today. And this is the genesis of the problem that we are dealing with today. So Kenya has slipped to the dark ages with regard to the observation of the rule of law and respect for human rights. We need to look no further than the return of the extrajudicial killings that have resumed in full consistency and brutality. Recently, these killings claimed a prominent member of your profession, and for the first time I saw lawyers in the streets. Willie Kamau, his client Josephat Mwendwa, and their taxi driver Joseph Mururi. The killings have claimed the lives of many Muslim preachers here at the coast, in addition to the lives of whistleblowers like my friend Liz Jacob Juma. Yesterday I was meeting with imams here in Kwale, and they were complaining about the extrajudicial killings which are prevalent in this county of Kwale. Serious. Nearly 30 imams have been killed in total here at the coast. Ensuring a decent standard of living for all citizens is a cardinal duty of the state. It's a critical element of governance. But let us look at the state of our economy today. Officially, we are being told that our economy is doing great, that Kenya is the preferred investment destination in Africa, and that we have never had it this good. We are not being told that never in the history has this nation wallowed in so much debt. And here I'm talking to you as the past Prime Minister. Just for record, I'm not a former Prime Minister. Because you only become former if there is current. So therefore, Mr. President, for you, I am the Prime Minister. The government says that the ratio of our national debt to the GDP stands at 48%. Independent analysts, whom I believe are right because I've been a Prime Minister, say our debt ratio is at least 52.6% of our GDP. In the past 3 years, the public debt has risen from 1.633 trillion Kenya shillings to 3.239 trillion, an increase of 1.606 trillion, or nearly 100%. In the financial year 2015-2016, the National Treasury provided for Kenya shillings 262 billion for debt repayment. This figure has risen to 433 billion, or an increase of 71 billion, or 20% just in 1 year alone. At this rate, in 5 years, this country will be spending all the tax collected in repaying public debts with nothing left for capital and recurrent development. The deeper we have gotten into debt, the more we have borrowed. Increasing public borrowing has resulted in undesirable fiscal consequences, such as high interest rates, inflation, and overburdening future generations. I was listening to a Postbank representative here. I was hoping that he was going to talk about interest rate capping, but he did not. Very guided. And when we are asked to rein in the banks to enable our citizens get some relief, we prevaricate. That can't be good corporate governance. It is a pointer to the recklessness and conspiracy against the citizens. At no time in our history have we carried a tax burden as heavy as we do now. Kenyans are indeed some of the most highly taxed people in the world. In January 2015, the government reintroduced the capital gains tax 30 years after it was abandoned. Earlier in 2014, the government announced plans to abolish many corporate tax holidays. This was hailed as a means to broaden tax base and fund many essential services. Instead, the reverse has happened. We have gone deeper into taxes, especially the VAT, pushing cost of living higher up. Last week, the price of petrol, diesel, and paraffin went up for the second time in less than 2 months. Last July, prices of petrol, diesel, and paraffin went up because the government increased levy by up to 50%. We are not in debt problem because we haven't taxed enough. We are in debt because we steal much of what we collect and what we borrow. Then we spend what remains on wrong priorities. So we steal much of what we collect and what we borrow. Then we have very wrong priorities. We haven't balanced our budget in recent years despite huge taxes growing and growing loans. The reason our taxes and debts are rising while without commensurate impact on service delivery and the lives of our people is corruption. That is the reason. The president himself declared corruption to be a national security threat in his State of the Nation speech in November of 2015. Little in the way of inspiring action has been forthcoming after that speech. A recent survey by auditors PricewaterhouseCoopers found Kenya to be the world's third most corrupt country in terms of the prevalence of economic crimes. Corruption has left us exposed in terms of security. Terrorist attacks are made easy by customs and border officials on the take, and the registration clerks who are ready to sell Kenya's identification documents to the highest bidder. Corruption has imposed our capacity, it has compromised our capacity to respond to terrorists. The August edition of the Nairobi Law Monthly magazine reports that of 30 armored personnel carriers purchased by the Kenya government in a shroud of secrecy, this was from China, and which failed to work on day one. According to the magazine, key components of these vehicles, including shock absorbers and air conditioning, don't work. Almost all have been parked since they were commissioned. The government has not responded to this devastating report. Your guess is as good as mine on what transpired and why they are silent. Corruption is turning us into the laughingstock of the world. In November of 2015, the New York Times published a story titled "An Anti-Corruption Plea in Kenya." This is, "Please just steal a little." In April 2016, America's PBS highlighting the extent to which corruption is ailing our country. It began with the plight of an athlete, Hillary Kiplimo, who finished third in the 2015 Standard Chartered Marathon in Nairobi, but did not receive his prize money of about 350,000 shillings. Instead, his name was replaced with that of one Julius Korir Kiplimo, despite being awarded a medal. He got a medal, but somebody else got the money. We have lately seen how this corruption has played out before the eyes of the world in Brazil. And you see headlines yesterday, even today, about the mess in Brazil. The athletes are winning medals, but under what conditions? All this point to a nation in a crisis of governance. Away from the material and financial corruption that is engulfing our nation, the moral corruption that is being drilled in our youth through false gospel of riches. This new gospel has powerful, energetic, and moneyed priests. And when I talk of the high priest of corruption, you know whom I'm talking about. They preach to our youth in schools and churches and markets that it is what you have, not how you got it, that counts. They preach that success is measured in riches and it comes not from hard work, but from cutting corners, deals, cheating, and stealing from fellow citizens and from the government. The hustler culture. All these failures are anchored by our struggling and wailing and failing institutions. Well-performing nations always stand on the soldiers of well-performing public institutions. The story of the IEBC, the EACC, the police, and the judiciary, plus the legislature, in part, is that of the institutions that have failed to inspire the confidence of the people. The fumbling by the ACC as money was being stolen in the NYS and over the Eurobond, the inability of the state to enforce security without extrajudicial killings, and the arbitrary arrest of citizens equally point to institutions failing to earn their place in the management of the nation. I remember I became like a lone ranger talking about the riots in the NYS. I was accused of somebody who's just being jealous of progress being made by the government. When I talked of the Eurobond, I was making wild allegations. But I want to tell you here, without fear of contradiction, that today, up to date, and read the current Auditor General's report tabled in Parliament 2 weeks ago, they cannot account for 100 billion Kenya shillings of the Eurobond money. And that's the reason why they have continued to borrow in the domestic market. When they say they are going out into the international market, not to compete with the private sector and the domestic market. That's the reason why the interest rates are going up. And that's the reason why Parliament is calling for the capping of interest rates. The culprit is none other than the government itself. Yet Kenya goes into the general election in August 2017. Traditionally, major episodes of corruption have accompanied polls. Whether you are talking about Goldenberg or Anglo-leasing, or sale of forest land and public plots, or loss of money at the OP and the National Treasury ahead of 2013, they usually happen around election time. Unprecedented scandals have taken place already, but worse can be expected. And just look at the outrageous figures which were released last week by IEBC as the ceilings for election expenditure. At 5 billion shillings for presidential elections, 500 million shillings for governors and senators, 33 million shillings for members of parliament, 10 million shillings for members of the county assembly, when their total salary for the whole 5 years is less than 10 million shillings. They say this is just an upper limit. So you are allowing people to spend all that kind of money. You cannot even accuse them because you have allowed them a very huge latitude. If you look at the economy of this country, you are crazy to be talking about 5 billion shillings purely for presidential elections alone. But then They just go and come up with figures and put it up there. They will not discuss it with any political actor. They can't even care to come and ask me, have been a presidential candidate. They seem to know it all. Why? Because it has been drawn by Jubilee themselves. And they just want to give them exactly the excuse to spend all those kind of money to corrupt and bribe people, to corrupt the political process. Yes, as lawyers here, who by training and experience are uniquely fitted to provide guidance and leadership in society, are loudly silent today. Lawyers who want to stand up for the rule of law have chosen to remain silent when the rule of law is under attack, when peaceful and legal protests are being violently broken up by the state, and when Kenyans exercising their freedom of assembly and expression are being wounded and killed by the state. When freedom to receive and impart information is being punished with many young Kenyans arrested over the Facebook posts and tweets, only a handful of lawyers have been willing to speak out for the mostly young, poor citizens being harassed by the state. And I was sometimes shocked when I saw the Director of Public Prosecutions saying when somebody is making outrageous allegations in a public rally, let him be arrested straight away. That is hate speech. I want lawyers to help us to define this animal called hate speech. Because I said, if what these people are talking about is hate speech, then Mr. Trump, a presidential candidate in the United States, should be in jail in Kenya for hate speech. Only a handful of lawyers have been willing to stand up. Lawyers have remained silent in the face of ballooning debts despite clear stipulation of Article 201 of our Constitution that there shall be openness and accountability, including public participation in financial matters. That public finance system shall promote an equitable society. The burden of taxation shall be shared fairly, and the burdens and benefits of the use of resources and public borrowing shall be shared equitably between present and future generations. As lawyers, you have a responsibility to ensure that the machinery available for our country to deal with these governance challenges are functioning and held accountable. You must focus on clarifying the rules and building a judicial system that can enforce those rules and resolve disputes without fear or favor. You have a duty to champion the removal of individuals linked to scandal, subversion of justice and law, and failure of judgment in the public offices. You have a duty to reassure our citizens that you will not sit by and watch public service being diminished by disgraces of officers trusted with public duty. A credible prosecution of some of those behind the many ills bedeviling the nation and its institutions will send the right signals and raise the bar in the requirements for public service. Let me, in conclusion, say this. I had opportunity 2 weeks ago to address the Royal Institute for International Affairs in London at Chatham House. And the subject was that Africa's democratization process under assault. And you know, I mentioned to you what had happened from independence. This happened also in other African countries. Many African countries acquired independence with a multi-party system in place. Within a short period of time, a school of thinking developed across the continent that the opposition was alien to traditional African societies. It was argued very eloquently by the founding fathers of independence, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Leopold Sedar Senghor in Senegal, Modibo Keïta in Mali, Ahmed Sékou Touré in Guinea, Mwalimu Nyerere in Tanzania, Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. They said that the traditional African society allowed for conflict resolution by way of consensus. That people sat under a tree and dialogued and resolved the conflict. Senghor called it palaver or dialogue. So they said, therefore, the Westminster type of opposition government is alien to traditional African society. So through a series of measures, coercion, blackmail, intimidation, opposition was led into extinction, and single-party systems emerged, followed by military coups, military dictatorships, and one-man rules. Monsieur le Président, the strong man, Mr. President. With that went the checks and balances. And that's how the institutions of governance were weakened. This is what happened also here in Kenya. When the constitution was amended to create an executive presidency from the premiership without going for an election. So you had a situation here where somebody became a president of this country without any Kenyan going to the ballot box to vote for him. Because the prime minister and the first prime minister, and you are now talking to the second prime minister, was elected as a member of parliament for Gatundu in 1963. The constitution was changed midstream in 1964 to create an executive president. So then metamorphosed into a president. In 1969, opposition had been banned, unopposed. In 1974, unopposed. In 1978, he dies. Then Nyayo now takes over, following the footsteps. 79, unopposed. 83, unopposed. 88, unopposed. So Kenyans went to the ballot box to elect a president for the first time in 1992 from independence. That was nearly 30 years we had been independent. Now in those days of the Cold War, when there was the bogey of communism, the West was so obsessed with the fight against communism that if you're in a third world and you go and say that you are an ally in the war against communism, nobody cared how you're running your country. You get all the amount of aid that you require. And that's how aid was pumped into the continent. Most of it did not do anything. It found its way back into bank accounts in Switzerland and other safe havens. So most of these countries became heavily indebted, HIPICs, but without much to show for that age in that period of time. So we call that period the wasted years of Africa, when most of these countries were indebted and the economy was stagnating, there was no growth. It was only after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when the wind of change began to blow in Eastern Europe, that it's also now found its way on the continent of Africa. The West, the language then changed. New vocabularies were invented. Transparency, accountability, and good governance. But in that other period there, that period is where we created the African strongmen. Idi Amin Dada could lynch, kill hundreds of thousands of Ugandans, was still elected the chairman of OAU. Mobutu Sese Seko, Kungoza Banga, the only cock that crows, could kill all his political opponents in Congo. Then he would travel to Paris in 747 Jumbo with Franco and all these people and be given a presidential reception at Champs-Élysées. Kamuzu Banda, Ngwazi of Malawi, could go on a live BBC broadcast and announce against his opponent, Chiume and Chipemere, that if they dare set foot in Malawi, there will be delicious meals for the crocodiles on River Zambezi. Jean Bedel Bokassa, Central African Republic, he renamed it Central African Empire and crowned himself the only emperor after Selassie had been deposed in Ethiopia. So this is how Africa has been ruled. It was only after this wind of change started blowing that the progressive forces managed to get support. And that is how the single party system stumbled in Zambia, in Benin, in Mali, and also finally in Kenya. And multipartyism was introduced. Then term limits were introduced, new constitutions were drafted. That's when now the 90s and the 2000s saw the increase of the growth of the economy in Africa. So that you could say that in the last one decade, out of 10 fastest growing economies in the world, 6 were African. But this is again under challenge democratization process, under siege. You're seeing the reemergence of strongmen on the continent. You're seeing constitutions again being revised to remove term limits. Oh, the people say that I'm the only person who can guarantee stability in the country. The people who have spoken. So these developments are very dangerous on the African continent. Elections are being held as rituals to perpetuate the incumbency. And no court in Africa has ever ruled against the incumbency, even however rigged the elections are. The only court that ruled against the results announced by the Electoral Commission was the Ivorian court. But it ruled because the incumbent had been defeated. It ruled that the incumbent had won. So unless the progressive forces in Africa rise up and stand up to defend this democratic space created at great expense of the African people, we are likely to see the situation returning back to those other days. You see the tendencies here, a rogue parliament coming out with amendments to the constitution through subsidiary legislation to cancel the gains which have been made. The Kenyans must stand up, every Kenyan, more particularly the lawyers of our country. There is a challenge to you people. God bless Kenya. God bless you.